So for this deployment package, what might be good to know is that it is published on our GitHub as well. So on our GitHub, when you go to our UbiOps repository and then to deployment template, we have an R deployment template now as well, with a template deployment package and an explanation of how it works. So what is exactly in there? It has the classical deployment structure in a way, but now instead of a deployment.py, it needs a deployment.r. And for what normally would be the requirements.txt for Python to manage the dependencies, now you can either choose from an install packages.r or an rm-lock template, rm-lock to lock your R environment, basically to make sure that all the dependencies are all right. So any of these can be used to manage your dependencies, whichever feels more comfortable to you. For the install packages, it just works like this. So for instance, you can add install.packages random forest to make sure that the random forest package is installed as well. Then for the deployment.r, it works quite similar to the deployment.py we have for Python, but now it doesn't have a class because classes is not really something in R. But it needs two methods. It has the init method and the request method. In the init function, or the init method is the initialization method for the deployment. So this is what we run whenever we spin up a new instance of your deployment. So this can be used for loading modules that have to be kept in memory or setting up connections, loading a trained model file, for instance, just to make sure that everything's ready in memory. Then we have the other method, which is the request method. And this is the method UbiOps actually calls whenever you make a request to your deployment. So this is where really your actual code goes. For this example, we've only have a really straightforward thing that returns the input multiplied by a random number. But of course, you can add anything here that you want. So this can be the place where you call the predict function of a trained model, for instance, or do some pre-processing, some training, anything, yeah, any piece of code that you really want to run that should go in here. What we've also done is added a run deployment.r in this template, like on our Git repository. This is so you can test out locally before you push it to UbiOps if it actually works. So if you run this run deployment.r, it will call the deployment as if UbiOps would do. So to simulate it, and in this way you can catch some errors early to make sure that your deployment package will work when you push it to UbiOps. Then let's see how that then actually works in the UI. So I can create a new deployment, just as usual, go to the deployment page in your UbiOps account and create a new deployment. I need to give it some type of name. So for instance, our test, and I need to specify the input and the output that is expected by my deployment. In this case, I've got a very simple input value called input, which is a double precision. What might be good to know is that right now I'm using the structured data, so I can specify really what data type is expected, but plain is also supported. In this way, you can pass anything as strings and we don't do any type checking. So I've got input, double precision. And for output, I've got an output field named output, and it's also a double precision type. I can add some labels. So for instance, I can add the label language, R language. So if I want to filter on the deployments later that are all, written in R, I can filter that using the labels. Then now we can specify the actual version of this deployment. So this is the place where we actually upload our code. So I have to specify what language it is written in. It's written in R. At the moment, we only support R 4.0. And then I can upload my deployment package, which I have here, which is the same one I just showed in Visual Studio Code just now. There are some advanced parameters, just like for the Python one, to take care of memory allocation and the minimum and maximum number of instances for scaling purposes. Right now, I'll just leave it for at the default values because that's perfectly fine. And I also don't need any environment variables. So I can just click create. And now we'll start building. And when it's done, we can actually use it and make requests to it. This one is done in the meantime. So now that we have our deployment, we can create a request to it, either a direct request or a batch request, just like for Python deployments. In this case, it just needs a number. So I can create a direct request and it will give me back the output. And